Mrs. Edelman is a graduate of Spelman College and Yale Law School, began her career in the mid-60s as the first black woman admitted to the Mississippi bar, directed the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and Educational Office in Jackson, Mississippi. In 1968, she moved to Washington, D.C. as counsel for the Poor People's March that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. began organizing before his death. She founded the Washington Research Project, which is the parent body of Children's Defense Fund. And for 2 years, she served as director of the Center for Law and Education at Harvard University. And in 1973, she began Children's Defense Fund.
I'm honored to be here to thank you, Ruth, and all of you in this wonderful literacy project for your work. There is nothing that is more important than giving our children a good start in life, and nothing will give them that good start better than reading. Because if you can't read, you can't compute, because you can't use a computer. And so what you're doing is just vital, and making sure that every one of our children is ready for school and that every one of our children can read. You talked about 5 to 9, because that 4th grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade cutoff is so crucial, really is the ticket to the future. So I'm just honored to be here today to thank you for what you're doing, and to thank all the volunteers who are working with you and all of those who are supporting you. Reading in my house was a very big deal. We would get a book before we'd ever get a second pair of shoes, and we children figured out very early on that the only time Daddy wouldn't give us a chore was when we were reading, so we all read a lot. So it comes from a great tradition. And I remember as a child watching him every day go into his book-lined study. And the books opened up the whole world for me as a small black girl growing up in a small, segregated southern town. But it could not contain the imagination, and it could not contain the openness that came from books. And we are stressing books now in everything we do, and reading in everything that we do. I feel so lucky as a black girl knowing about Edna St. Vincent Millay and Shakespeare and Walt Whitman, and I want every kid to know about those, but I want every child in America to read Langston Hughes and to know the great authors and the broad cultural heritage. So we've just now begun to publish a new reading list so that I hope all children can grow up, and we've been working with children's book authors and appreciating excellent children's literature now, which is growing and growing. And so thank you for what you're doing, because a child, as you said, I've already said, who cannot read and who cannot write and who cannot compute and who cannot use a computer is sentenced to social and economic death in our knowledge-based American and global economies. Yet millions of our children cannot read, and too many enter school not ready to learn. And millions more go through schools miserable, retained in grades, dropping out of school because they cannot read. And many graduate from high school still unable to read well enough to pass an entry-level job test or to get an above-poverty wage job in our economy. And there's a strong relationship between educational attainment and reading and job readiness, and the majority of poor children today are living in families that are working, but they can't get their wages above poverty, and that is related to the quality of the education that they have received. And again, reading is key to that.
You've spoken eloquently about the need for reform of the schools to be about children and not about buildings or principals or teachers or administrators. What would be your most important policy reform for schools that would help children the most?
Well, we've all got to have the belief system and value and reflect that all children can learn. It's believing that all children, not just some children, not just white children, not just middle-class children, not children without disabilities, but the belief system that all children can learn, and then providing the supports for all children. That they, it's not right that we have no school system of any size in America where all the children in that school system are doing well. And it is not right that usually the poorest children with the least family and neighborhood wealth have the poorest schools, the least experienced teachers, the least good laboratories. So we've got to be equitable in the supports that we provide, but most important is believing in children and then trying to get all of them to have what they need in order to get ready for school and then to respect and expect them to learn in schools.
Can you imagine how limiting the world is for people who cannot read? Once mastered, reading is a skill that never can be taken away. But without this mastery, an individual will always have barriers to achieving their full potential.
The fact that 200 children will drop out of school, 45 children will be born into poverty, 16 children will be born at low birth weight, 5 children will be arrested for violent crime, and 1 child will be wounded by gunfire in the next half hour as we sit here, is a far greater threat to America's security and to America's democracy than Saddam Hussein or any external enemy. Yet many leaders in both of our political parties continue to play politics with the lives of our children, who are the true security of our nation. And I want to just talk because while we need to do the one-on-one, the neighborhood by neighborhood, the child by child, the congregation by congregation, we have got to change the fundamental priorities of this nation and redefine what is important in the new century. The budget for proposed military readiness in the post-Cold War era is being greatly increased, while the budget for our children's school readiness and education readiness is being cheated. You and I must speak up about and organize about that. The social and health security of voting senior citizens is correctly at the top of every politician's agenda. And as I get older, I'm more concerned that they stay there. But at the same time, I think it is not fair or sensible that the health and social security of non-voting children are at or near the bottom. If the measure of our judgment is actual level of investment and child outcomes rather than political rhetoric. It's time for this nation to be fair to its children and to invest the same level of leadership, attention, and resources we invest in assuring the elderly and non-needy adults and corporate and military interests with the same interests that they are protected. In this time of unprecedented economic prosperity, federal and state budget surpluses, tobacco settlement monies, and I'm very pleased to hear that this firm is going to invest a portion of that in the community and in children's health. That's really very important. In the time when we have growing numbers of millionaires and billionaires, I do believe that child welfare must take precedence over corporate welfare, and military readiness must at least be treated in some fairer way with our children's school readiness. It's simply not right that we have an $8.6 trillion economy, and yet we cannot see that every child is assured enough to eat, a place called home to sleep, health care to prevent and treat illness, an opportunity to get ready and learn in school through quality early childhood experiences and parent supports, and to be safe and positively engaged after school, which again is why what you're doing is so important. And the quality of the programs, the substance of the programs, the quality of the books and the training of the teachers is so important to whether or not after school and summer and other supplemental programs are going to really result in our children doing better over the long run. So I just hope that in this time of prosperity and at a time when the communist threat is over, that we are going to give our children's school and educational readiness the strong priority that it deserves.
Too many children come to school without the support system that more advantaged children have. What can more well-off parents do for less well-off children? What can communities of faith do to give children the support system they need to succeed in schools?
Well, all of us believe that parents are the most important people in children's lives, and I think all of us in our society can do much more to prepare people for parenting and to support parents. And while we know that many parents have to work in order to make a living, and now we're requiring all poor parents to go out to work, all of us can raise a voice to make sure that when they work, that there's quality child care available for their children. All of us can provide through our congregations parent training and parent supports in congregations of different faiths or the largest suppliers of child care in the country. All of us can help parents be less worried with their school-age children coming home alone by having after-school programs and weekend programs and summer programs that are of high quality. That just takes away a lot of the stress and strain. All of us can make sure that when poor parents are trying to work, that they have health care. And because 90% of the people without health insurance in this country are working people. So I think there's a lot we can do through our congregations to really support parents, and all of us ought to look at the importance of our family and youth ministries, because I think that our communities of faith are not providing the adequate alternatives to the gang dealers and the drug dealers. And lastly, I just think that one-on-one mentoring, one-on-one tutoring, all of us finding time to volunteer, as you know, to help children learn how to read or to help families who have substance abuse problems or others, that reach out. We have developed a new program we're testing called One Church, 10 Families with juvenile court judges, because when they see a child that's in trouble, they figure that maybe there's something else going on in the family, and if they could get churches and other congregations of faith to say, we're going to adopt 10 families each and provide a support system, because it's amazing to me how isolated so many parents, poor and middle class, are, and how they need communities of caring to be there for them. All of us, I think, have got to talk more and organize and mobilize to ensure a quality and equitable education for every child, because that quality education is the jugular of their lifeline to the future. And while I believe that in every neighborhood and every parent should have a choice, I believe that most of us have got to pay most of our attention to the public schools, because that's where 90% of our children in America growing up. The public schools are the crucible of democracy, and we've got to improve those schools so that we can improve the life chances for the overwhelming majority of our children. Now, I am not talking about investing more and more in public education as we now know it, where children too often are treated as besides the point rather than as the point. Not public education where about half of our children are dropping out before graduation, but public education where every one of our children is provided adequate supports to graduate from high school with the skills they need to succeed. I am not interested in public education where only some children learn in some schools, but public education where all children are expected and helped to learn in all schools. It's not right that the children who are the poorest and who need the most have the poorest neighborhoods, the poorest schools, the least experienced teachers, the least well-equipped laboratories, the oldest computers. We need to be thinking about what it is we're trying to do to make sure that every child can learn. We don't want public education where the achievement of children takes a back seat to the job security and perks of many teachers, administrators, janitors, board members, and politicians. But public education where everyone, educators and parents in the entire community, is held accountable for the quality and the results that they produce, and that is children who can read and write and add and compute at and above grade level. We don't want public education where black and brown and non-English speaking poor and disabled children who depend on and constitute a majority of children in inner city public schools are less valued and less prepared than more affluent white children without special needs. I think in this democracy, in a world that is mostly not white, in a world that is mostly poor, in a world where a majority of people do not speak English, that we can show them a living democracy by reflecting that in our preparation of all of our children for leadership. Not public education that resists innovation or creativity and collaborative relationships with parents and communities, but public education that recognizes that home, school, and community cooperation is crucial to children achieving, which is why the collaborative efforts of groups like yours, of congregations, of the faith community, of of women and volunteers, of young people, is very crucial. We're basically talking about public education that really expects every child to learn and supports all of those children in reaching that goal. Children try to live up to our expectations. And if we don't expect much of them, and some of us don't expect much of some groups of children, then they will live up or down to those expectations. And if we don't expect them to learn, they will not. But if we expect them to learn and respect them, you will see them beginning to achieve. That's why I'm so grateful to all of you who support our Beat the Odds every year here in Minneapolis. I'm so tired of celebrating failure. We want to celebrate the success of the majority of our children who are not killing somebody, who are not out there on drugs, who are not getting pregnant, but who are struggling every day against odds you and I must change to make it. So I'm just very grateful to you, and we're trying to spread this all over so that people begin to understand that these young people are individual young people. Don't make group judgments. See and make sure that they get what they need in order to begin to succeed. So thank you.
How do we make those connections today in urban areas? It's not like the old days where you knew your neighbors. You grew up in a small community. How do we make those links in a tough urban environment?
We have to work at it. I go to an inner city church, Shiloh Baptist Church, a great church in Washington, D.C., but we have paired up, and we have a family life center and many outreach programs in our own ministry. We have paired up with a wonderful Jewish congregation across town in the neighborhood where I live. And we do lots of things together, whether it's working in homeless shelters or celebrating Sabbath together. But we've got to be intentional in forming relationships. One can do joint mentoring and joint tutorings. You know, we have children's Sabbaths every third weekend in October, and we publish a children's Sabbath kit every year. It will be out the end of April, and it's ready to learn, ready to succeed. And we're finding more and more congregations, and there are about 50,000 that participate, and it's Christian, and it's Jewish, and it's Muslim, and other faiths. But more and more of these congregations are joining together in worship and in prayer and in advocacy, not just congregation by congregation. And in those children's Sabbath kits, there are a number of suggestions for ways in which one can do that. So you have to make an effort, because the artificiality of the political separation and the economic separation means that you have to build bridges. And that's a lot of work, and you can't kind of, you know, get discouraged after the first 2 or 3 failures. All of us can do several things, I think, to begin to change the culture and the ethos that imprisons too many of our children. We must all operate from the premise that all children can learn, and make sure, if we don't believe it, then we ought to act as if we believe it. But we really should understand that we're not just investing in those children over there. We really have got to affirm the sacredness and the specialness of every child, and want for everybody else's child what we want for our own. We must work together to ensure that every child in the school is ready to learn, and that means we've got to fight this year to get the $21 billion that's in the budget, the president's budget for child care, out and passed, and so that we can really begin to get those hard-working parents who are struggling and who are going to have to go off welfare, and those who've never been on welfare and in the workforce but can't afford decent child care. Decent child care. Every child in America should have a high-quality preschool experience. So I really hope that we will work to ensure that, and to see that every child gets a quality Head Start, and to see how we put these Head Start dollars together with these preschool dollars, together with the child care dollars, into a comprehensive, thoughtful system with after-school dollars, so that we don't have 5 million children coming home alone to empty houses. And they ought to be positively engaged with adults, because we know that between those hours of 3 and 7 at night is when most of our children who get into trouble. The gang dealers are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we have got to have quality alternatives for them, learning how to read, engaged in chess, engaged in other stimulating activities after school, on weekends, and during the summer months. I hope we will all invest in quality teaching and begin to affirm the importance of this as a career, and quality child care as a good career. It's simply not right that we are more willing to pay parking lot attendants more than we pay people who are dealing with children in the early years of life. It is simply not right that in many states you have to have X number of hours if you want to get somebody to be your manicurist, but you can, in many states, just walk into a classroom and open up a child care center without a single hour of training. We've got to get our values straight in America and translate that into sound policy. So I thank you for what you're doing. I think that the entryway to the future is through reading, that all of you who understand that children can learn if we invest in that learning and take time and are consistent and sustain that help over time, begin to sort of translate that into broader voices for public school reforms. It will be a tragedy if this new round of so-called education reform ends up being about everything and everybody except children. It's not about who can control the House of Representatives the next time around and therefore who can turn out the vote. We have got to make sure that children are at the center of education reform, that children's reading and children's writing and children's adding and getting ready to use computers is at the center of the debate, not about other groups and other interest groups. So that's something that you know the importance of, and I hope that we can translate that into change national policy and change national priorities. But what you are doing is so important, and I thank you again for it.
You've written many books. You're a successful author. What was the inspiration for your book, Stanford Children?
Well, Stanford Children, which is a children's book, kind of, really came out of the Stanford Children Day speech. In June 1st, 1996, we wanted to begin to see how we could build a grassroots movement for children across race, across gender, across faith, across age, and to sort of say to all Americans who are, want to make a new commitment to kids, to come to the Lincoln Memorial. And we wanted to show the political leaders in that year who were debating welfare reform that there was a real constituency out here. And I look back, it's a miracle to me that in just 4.5 months, 250,000 people showed up. But since then, this children's book is based on that speech that day, but I've been more grateful for what has happened since that first Stanford Children witness at the Lincoln Memorial, because Stanford Children is now a separate affiliated organization of the Children's Defense Fund. My son Jonah is the head of it. Wonderful young staff, almost all of them under 30. And on June 1st, 1997, we stood for children in all 50 states and stood for healthy children. Out of that came a national coalition and a huge number of local events that led to the enactment of Hatch-Kennedy, or the largest investment in children's health since Medicaid. It's called the Child Health Insurance Program, and it will serve up to 5 million children, most of whom live in working families. Now we've got to make sure those families know it and that they in fact get the services. And last year, Stanford Children stood again in 1,200 local events all over the country for quality child care. We had the money in the budget, but we got distracted last year, so nobody did much good policy. But this year we're going to stand again in all 50 states for getting all children ready to learn and ready to succeed. And we will have a stand on the internet, so I hope people will tap in to www.stand.org and take a stand to make sure that all of our children know how to learn and are ready for school. And we can do that if we all stand together and say we are going to insist that this wealthy nation give all of our children a healthy start. This June 1st, thanks to what you've been doing, Stanford Children has been growing. Out of that came a new $48 billion child health insurance program. We're trying to implement it. 90% of the children who can get health insurance around the country are in working families. We can do something about it. Standing together, we can begin to raise a voice to get every child ready to learn, ready to succeed, which is the theme for this year's Stanford Children and Children's Sabbaths in our congregations in October. And ultimately, we're going to have to talk about how we end the scandal of child poverty in this nation. We should not have poor children in the richest nation on earth if we are who we want to be. So thank you for your work. I look forward to continuing to see it grow as we build together a movement that leaves no child behind. Thank you.
The minutes that I have today will be on the community's perspective with the Twin Cities Coalition for Literacy. As a person who lives and works in the community and a recently elected member to the St. Paul School Board, I've had the privilege and the honor to see firsthand the workings of, and I'm using the acronym TCJC. Excuse me. The students and volunteers from the Twin Cities Jewish Coalition have partnered with our schools, and they came to our school, some of our schools and our school districts to promote reading and enhance reading and reading skills. in the flyer in front of you, the newsletter, it talks a little bit more in depth about the different programs that's going on in our school. And while this partnership, and I believe it's going to continue, especially it's going to continue, today is our first day of our new superintendent for the St. Paul schools. And Ms. Harvey has been very visible and very vocal about advocating the importance of reading. In fact, she's coming in and she's telling that every kid, every student in the St. Paul School District will read a minimum of 25 books. And I'll tell you, with her vitality and enthusiasm, she's going to get that accomplished.
The mission of the Twin Cities Jewish Coalition for Literacy is quite simply to promote literacy in partnership with our neighbors. By working cooperatively with congregations, with organizations, with families, and with individuals, we are focusing our joint efforts on building reading skills in children in the critical ages 5 through 9. At least 16 Jewish organizations within the Twin Cities have signed on already to participate in this literacy project. In partnership with the schools, community-based organizations, neighborhood groups, our volunteers will be engaged in one-to-one tutoring, reading aloud with children, and providing books, supplies, and other tools for learning.
How can people find out more about the Children's Defense Fund?
They can call us here in Minnesota. We have a Children's Defense Fund Minnesota headed by Jim Koppel.
Children's Defense Fund mission is to leave no child behind and to ensure every child a healthy start, a head start, a fair start, a safe start, and a moral start in life, with the support of caring families and communities.
We work on a lot of issues that we think are of major concern to all the families and people of Minnesota. But just look in the phone book, call it the Children's Defense Fund Minnesota, Jim Koppel. He's got a lot for you to do. And I hope that people here can stand for children. If they want to do that and participate in Children's Sabbaths, Jim Koppel, again, can help them learn how.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.